I used to dread the sound of my own car pulling into the parking lot. That rusty engine, the faded paint, the door that didn't close quite right, it all announced my arrival like a warning bell. I could see the shift in body language as I passed by the pool or the mailboxes. People who barely knew my name would smirk or glance sideways as if confirming some private joke. It wasn't just about the car. It was about what it represented. Failure, stagnation, a woman who had been left behind. And yet, none of them knew how much energy it took just to keep going each day. The worst part wasn't the laughing. It was the pretending, not just pretending not to hear, but pretending it didn't matter. I'd fake a smile, wave back, then carry groceries up the stairs with trembling hands because I refused to let them see me struggle. I told myself I was being proud, but truthfully, I was exhausted emotionally, physically, financially. I was holding together a life that was falling apart behind closed doors. That car was the last thing I owned outright, and letting it go would mean losing one more piece of my independence. People always assume that when you're down, it's because you didn't try hard enough. They didn't see me working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, scraping together enough money to keep the lights on and the kids fed. They didn't know that every choice I made was calculated between rent or car repairs, gas or groceries. I wasn't lazy. I was surviving, and when you're in survival mode, appearances aren't a priority. That car was a symbol of everything I had endured, and somehow it became the thing they mocked the most. There were moments I wanted to scream, to shout out everything I had been through, to tell them about the abusive marriage I escaped from, the court battles, the debt collectors. But instead, I bit my tongue. I had learned long ago that the world rarely listens to broken women. It only notices them when they rise, so I stayed quiet. Not out of weakness, but because I was building something they couldn't see. I was planting seeds in the dark, waiting for the day when something would finally bloom. And every evening after work, I'd sit in that old Toyota with the engine still running, just breathing, sometimes crying, sometimes staring into space for 10-20 minutes before I had the strength to go upstairs. It was the only place I could be alone with my thoughts. No judgments, no fake smiles, just me and the noise of that stubborn engine that, like me, refused to give up. They laughed because they saw rust and dents. But one day, I knew they'd see something else entirely. When the divorce papers were finally signed, I felt both free and terrified. At 42, I was standing at the edge of a cliff with no parachute. The house was gone, the shared accounts, emptied long before. I walked out with my name, my kids, that car. No retirement plan, no safety net, just bills piling up in a deep, annoying fear I couldn't show. I had to smile for my children, pretend I had things under control, but inside, I was unraveling. Starting over sounds empowering until you're actually forced to do it alone. Exhausted and unsure of where to begin. That old Toyota, the one people laughed at, became more than a vehicle. It was a quiet witness to my breakdowns, my small victories, my silent prayers whispered at red lights. I'd drive home from my minimum wage job with sore feet, wondering how I was going to pay the electricity next week. I learned to stretch everything: meals, gas, even toothpaste. My kids never knew how tight it got. I shielded them from the worst of it, even if that meant skipping meals myself so they could eat a little better. Friends disappeared. Some slowly, others with the kind of silence that tells you they were only there for the good times. My family lived far, and emotionally, even farther. I remember one night, after a particularly humiliating shift at work, I sat in the parking lot and thought about how easy it would be to just give up. But then I saw a picture my daughter had drawn in the back seat, a stick figure of me with a crown on my head. It broke me. Not because it was cute, but because she still saw me as strong. I couldn't afford to fall apart. There's something sacred about the moment you realize no one is coming to save you. It shifts something inside. The fear doesn't go away, but it becomes a fuel. I started watching free YouTube videos about finances, reading blog posts about side hustles, and researching how to build a business with zero capital. I had no degree, no fancy skills, but I had grit. I didn't need a miracle. I needed a plan and the discipline to follow it. And I knew, deep down, if I kept showing up, something had to change eventually. Every night, when the kids were asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my old laptop, searching for opportunities. I applied for online gigs, joined forums, asked dumb questions to strangers just to learn something new. I failed a dozen times before I saw any results, but each failure taught me what didn't work. It was slow, painfully slow, but with every step, I was clawing my way out of the hole I had been pushed into, not for revenge, not to prove anything to anyone, just to finally breathe without the weight of survival crushing my chest. The public library became my second home. After dinner and dishes, after checking homework and packing lunches for the next day, I'd tuck my kids into bed and quietly slip out. The library was only 15 minutes away, but those minutes felt like a bridge between two worlds. The life I was trying to survive and the life I was desperate to build. It was open late, warm in the winter, and quiet enough to think. I didn't go there to read novels. I went there to rebuild myself. I started with books on budgeting, then moved to online business. I learned what passive income meant. I learned how affiliate marketing worked, what digital products were, how people turned blogs into income streams. I didn't understand everything, but I refused to let that stop me. I had a notebook filled with scribbles and arrows and messy plans that only made sense to me. That notebook became my vision board, my roadmap, and my therapy. Some nights, I was so tired I could barely focus, but I kept pushing. I told myself, no one's going to do this for you. No alimony, no inheritance, no lottery ticket. Just me, some borrowed Wi-Fi, and a fire in my chest that wouldn't go out. I watched free tutorials on YouTube with subtitles on so I wouldn't disturb others. I read blog posts, joined free courses, and taught myself how to create landing pages, write copy, and build basic websites. Slowly, very slowly, things started making sense. Meanwhile, I still showed up at my day job every morning. I smiled at customers and folded clothes on tired feet. No one there knew I was spending nights trying to reinvent myself. To them, I was just another employee with an old car and a quiet personality. But I carried this secret version of myself, the student, the strategist, the builder, with a quiet pride. It was mine, and no one could take it from me. Sometimes I'd see the same people at the library, older men studying for law exams, teenagers escaping noisy homes, a few mothers like me with tired eyes and hopeful hearts. There was something sacred about that silence we shared. No one was there because life was easy. We were all trying to climb out of something. And even though we rarely spoke, I felt seen there in a way I didn't feel anywhere else. I remember one particular night, I was reading about freelance copywriting, how people made thousands writing sales pages and emails. It sounded too good to be true, but I decided to try anyway. I signed up on freelancing platforms and sent proposals late into the night. Most were ignored. Some got rejections. But one day, someone gave me a shot, a $50 job writing product descriptions. It wasn't much, but it felt like my first win. Like maybe this wasn't all just a fantasy. I didn't spend the money, I reinvested it, bought a better internet plan, upgraded my old laptop with secondhand parts, bought an online course with a payment plan. I became obsessed, not with money, but with the idea that I could control my own time. I wasn't chasing handbags or luxury vacations. I was chasing mornings where I didn't wake up with anxiety. Days where I could take my kids to school without rushing. Nights where I could rest without guilt. Back at the condo, the poolside gossip continued. I'd pass them sometimes, the neighbors lounging in fake designer sandals, laughing at who wore what or who hadn't paid the condo fee. I wasn't angry at them. I was just on a different path. They were trading opinions while I was building options. They were chasing validation. I was chasing peace. I kept my head down and my focus forward, knowing that one day the sacrifices would speak louder than their whispers ever could. That library, with its fluorescent lights and old computers, saved me. It gave me space to dream and tools to fight back. Every hour I spent, there was an hour invested in my future self. A woman who wouldn't need to explain why she drove an old car, because she'd be the one writing the checks for her next property. And even if nobody clapped for me then, I knew what I was building. And that was enough to keep going. My first attempt at making money online was through handmade crafts. I stayed up late making candles and body scrubs, packaging them with little tags that said, "Made with love." I listed them on Etsy and posted on local Facebook groups. A few friends bought out of pity, but strangers? Nothing. Weeks went by. No sales. I watched the supplies gather dust on my kitchen counter. Eventually, I had to admit it wasn't working. I felt stupid, like I had overestimated myself. But I didn't have the luxury of giving up. Then I tried online tutoring. I thought, I'm educated, I speak well, this will work. But the competition was brutal. My profile barely got any views. The one student I landed stopped after 2 lessons. I kept refreshing the site for bookings that never came. I started wondering if I had anything valuable to offer the world at all. I questioned everything. Maybe I had waited too long to start over. Maybe I really was too old, too late. But then I'd look at my kids and remember they were watching me. I couldn't quit on them. Some nights, I'd cry in the car before going upstairs. The silence inside that car was where I let go. I'd scream without making a sound, gripping the steering wheel like it could hold me together. But once I opened that front door, I put the pieces back in place. I didn't want my kids to feel the weight I carried. I wanted them to feel safe, even if I was crumbling inside. It was lonely. There was no one to talk to, no one checking in. But maybe that solitude was part of what made me stronger. Each failure taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. I learned how to market better, how to price things realistically, how to speak to a specific audience. I learned how rejection feels and that it doesn't kill you. Every time I hit a wall, I found a way around it, even if it took time. I stopped chasing perfect ideas and started testing messy ones. I understood that failure wasn't the opposite of progress. It was part of the process. Painful, yes, but necessary. There was 1 month where I made $12, not $1,200, $12. I laughed when I saw the payout, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that masks despair. Still, I kept going. I told myself, if I can make 12, I can make 50. If I can make 50, I can make 500. I didn't care how small the wins were. I counted everyone. And I reminded myself, small progress is still progress. It's still movement. And movement is everything when you're trying to climb out of a hole. I stopped measuring success by how much money I was making. Instead, I started measuring it by how much I was learning. If I spent 5 hours trying something new, even if it failed, I didn't call it wasted time. I called it training. That mindset shift changed everything. I was no longer just reacting to life. I was building something, brick by brick. I didn't know what the final result would look like, but I knew it would be mine. And that gave me Strength. There were moments when I wanted to shut it all down, to stop trying, to accept a life of just surviving. But something inside me kept whispering, not yet. That voice got me through the worst nights. It told me the struggle meant something, that maybe I wasn't failing, maybe I was becoming, and I clung to that idea like a rope in the dark. Because when everything feels like it's falling apart, sometimes the only thing you can do is trust the process. Even if you can't see the outcome, I didn't need to succeed overnight. I just needed to keep showing up, keep trying, keep learning. Every failure was proof that I had the courage to try, and that mattered more than anyone's opinion of me. I was still that woman with the old car, yes. But now I was also the woman who didn't quit, who kept showing up to fight for a better life, even when the world gave her every reason to stop. And somehow that made all the difference. It was a Tuesday night, close to midnight. I was scrolling through freelance job boards after another long day. Most of the listings were the usual data entry gigs that paid pennies, writing tasks with unrealistic deadlines and fake promises of easy money. I was about to shut my laptop when I saw it. Looking for someone to manage a luxury travel blog, remote position, flexible hours, must be organized and creative. It felt too good to be real. An international client, luxury travel. I almost didn't click it. My first thought was, this isn't for someone like me. I had never traveled internationally. I didn't own anything luxury. I was a single mom from a modest neighborhood with a background in retail and customer service. I stared at the job post for 20 minutes, convincing myself it was either a scam or they'd never even opened my application. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe desperation, made me apply anyway. I wrote from the heart. I told them I was a fast learner, that I took initiative, and I knew how to communicate clearly. I didn't expect to hear back. For 3 days, nothing. Then suddenly, an email. We liked your approach. Can you do a short test task? My heart jumped. I read the message 5 times to be sure it was real. The task was simple. Rewrite a sample article with a more engaging tone. I spent hours on it, researching their blog, studying their voice, and rewriting every sentence until it flowed. I submitted it at 3 a.m., then spent the whole next day refreshing my inbox. I couldn't focus on anything else. That evening, they responded. This is exactly what we were looking for. When can you start? I stared at the screen, frozen. It felt surreal. They wanted me. Not a version of me with a perfect resume or a fancy degree, just me as I was. I started the following Monday. At first, it was a few hours a week, helping organize posts, write captions, proofread content. But within weeks, they increased my hours. Then they offered me a monthly retainer. For the first time in years, I exhaled. The work was actually enjoyable. I got to write about places I'd never been to, research destinations I had only dreamed of, and collaborate with a creative team based all over the world. I learned how to schedule content, optimize blog posts for SEO, and manage editorial. Calendars. I wasn't just writing, I was managing a brand voice, and they trusted me with it. That trust did something to me. It reminded me that I still had value, that I could thrive in a world I thought was out of reach. Money didn't flood in overnight, but it was consistent. I was making more than I ever had in retail, and more importantly, I had time. I could be home when my kids needed me. I wasn't racing against a time clock or begging for overtime. I started budgeting better. I paid off a credit card. Then another. I fixed the brake pads on the car. Slowly, the cracks in my life were getting patched, not just financially, but emotionally. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was building, looking. Back, I think about how close I came to ignoring that opportunity. If I had let fear or self-doubt win that night, everything could have been different. It wasn't just about that job. It was about saying yes to something bigger than my current situation. I realized how many people miss life-changing chances because they don't think they're ready, but you're never really ready. You just say yes and figure it out as you go. That night, I said yes, and I've never regretted it. That one decision created a ripple effect. I gained confidence. I saw new possibilities. I no longer saw myself as just a struggling mom. I started seeing myself as a professional, a businesswoman, a writer. And all it took was saying yes to something I almost scrolled past. That's the thing about opportunities. They rarely show up looking perfect. Sometimes they look like risks. Sometimes they look like work. But if you're brave enough to try, they might just change everything. In the beginning, they paid me $300 a month. It wasn't much, but it was consistent. I handled blog posts, organized email replies, scheduled content. I treated that small role like it was my own company. I took pride in every detail, stayed up late perfecting headlines and testing layouts. Little by little, they noticed. They started asking for my opinion. Then they started asking me to take over tasks without even checking first. I didn't see it as pressure. I saw it as trust. By month 6, they offered me full control of their digital strategy. I was stunned. I wasn't formally trained. I had no marketing degree, no agency background, but they didn't care. What they saw was someone reliable, consistent, and obsessed with doing good work. I created a plan, optimized their traffic, and helped increase their sales through content. That $300 became $1,000, then $2,500. Within months, I was invoicing $7,000 a month. I felt like I was dreaming, but the work was real. You'd think I'd celebrate with a new car or take a vacation, but I didn't. I drove that same old Toyota to the grocery store, parked next to luxury SUVs, and felt zero shame. My neighbors didn't know what I was earning, and I didn't need them to. I had lived too long worrying about appearances. Now, I cared only about peace of mind. Instead of upgrading my image, I upgraded my future. I started saving, investing, and learning how to protect what I was building. Every dollar mattered. I tracked every cent. I paid off my last credit card, built an emergency fund, and put away money for my kids' needs. I took an online course in digital marketing, not because I needed it for the job, but because I wanted to become better. I started seeing money as a tool, not a reward. The old me would have spent it trying to feel successful. The new me knew real success was invisible. It was freedom, stability, and options. People around me started to notice something was different, but they couldn't quite figure out what. I didn't brag. I didn't change my wardrobe or post about anything online, but I had more time. I wasn't constantly rushing, stressed, or tired. I showed up calmer, more present. I finally had mental space to think beyond the next bill. And for the first time, I could say no to things that drained me. I wasn't desperate anymore. That changed everything. I remember sitting at my tiny kitchen table, looking at a bank transfer notification, $6,850. I blinked twice, just to make sure. The woman who once cried over overdraft fees was now building a business that gave her back her time. But I didn't scream or run outside. I just sat quietly, whispered thank you, and got back to work. Because I knew this wasn't luck. This was the result of every late night, every failure, every tear I had hidden behind the steering wheel. The truth is, the money didn't make me feel rich. What made me feel rich was not having to ask for permission anymore. Not having to explain to my kids why we couldn't afford something basic. Not worrying when the fridge was half empty. That's a kind of wealth no one can see, but it fills every corner of your life. I still live simply, but inside I was finally breathing differently, Slower, deeper, freer dots, so I kept my car. Kept my old sneakers. But inside that same woman who used to count coins at the checkout line, a quiet power was growing. I didn't need to show anyone what I had built. I just needed to keep building it, not for revenge, not for validation, but because I had finally proven to myself that I could do it, and that was more valuable than any applause. After stabilizing my income, I became obsessed with the idea of building long-term wealth. I knew freelancing was great, but I didn't want to trade time for money forever. That's when I stumbled into real estate investing. I didn't know much, but I dove in like I always had, with curiosity and discipline. I read books, watched free webinars, and joined online forums. I asked questions, even if they made me feel dumb. I didn't want quick wins. I wanted real ownership. Something that could grow even while I slept out. My first deal was a small apartment in a not-so-glamorous part of town. The price was reasonable, and I could afford it with the money I had saved. I negotiated hard. I managed the renovations myself, hiring reliable contractors and learning from every mistake. I sold it 3 months later with a decent profit. Not life-changing money, but enough to confirm I could do it again. And I did. I flipped another, then another. Slowly, my confidence grew, and so did my portfolio. Back at the condo, nothing about me had changed on the surface. Same car, same quiet demeanor, same routine, but internally, I was a different woman. I walked differently. I spoke with clarity. I no longer reacted to gossip or judgment. I understood now that real power doesn't have to be loud. It's not in flashy outfits or loud conversations. It's in control. Control of your time, your energy, your future. And I had that now, in a way I'd never had before. What surprised me most was how much mindset influenced everything. The woman I was a few years ago wouldn't have believed she was capable of investing in real estate. She would have waited for permission or someone to validate her potential. But the new me didn't wait. I gave myself the green light. I still had fears, but I moved anyway. I had learned that growth always comes with discomfort, and discomfort wasn't a reason to stop. It was a sign I was on the right path. The wins were never dramatic. No viral moments, no massive overnight success. Just quiet, consistent growth. I bought properties, managed tenants, reinvested the profits. I listened more than I spoke, observed more than I posted. Every month that passed, my freedom expanded. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was creating options. That's something money alone can't buy. You build that with courage, patience, and belief in the unseen. People started noticing something was different. Not because I told them, but because they could feel it. My energy had changed. I wasn't rushed, anxious, or uncertain anymore. I had boundaries. I had focus. Some neighbors stopped making jokes. Others tried to get close, sensing I was up to something, but I didn't need to prove anything. I had spent years being underestimated. I had nothing to prove, and that was the most powerful position I had ever been in. I stopped explaining my choices. I no longer needed to justify why I still drove an old car or why I didn't flaunt my progress. I was playing a long game. While others measured success with likes and outfits, I measured it in equity and peace of mind. Real estate became more than an investment vehicle. It became a mirror. It showed me how far I had come, how much I had learned, and how deeply I had changed. It taught me patience, resilience, and strategy. The most valuable thing I gained wasn't the money. It was the quiet confidence that no one could take away. The certainty that I had built something real, brick by brick, decision by decision. The life I was living wasn't gifted, it was earned. And while my neighbors still saw the same old car in the parking lot, they no longer saw a woman stuck in place. because I had outgrown their perception, and honestly, I no longer needed their approval. It started with a random message from a real estate agent I had met during one of my early flips. He said a developer was launching an exclusive condo project in the nicer part of town and was inviting a small group of early investors. I almost ignored the message, thinking it was out of my league, but curiosity got the better of me. IRSVPD. Not expecting much, maybe a free brochure and a cup of cheap coffee. I showed up in my usual clothes, quietly observing, listening, asking questions others were too proud to ask. The building was stunning. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, a rooftop pool, and views that stretched over the entire city. The penthouse unit wasn't even on the open market yet. It was reserved for serious buyers. I asked the price out of pure curiosity, then did the math in my head. To my own surprise, I could afford it in cash. Not comfortably, but responsibly. I had saved aggressively, invested smart, and lived below my means for years. I didn't need a mortgage. I could sign the papers that day, and I did. Quietly, no celebration, no social media announcement. I signed the paperwork, wired the funds, and walked out with the keys to a life I had only imagined during my nights at the library. The same woman who once cried in a parking lot over a $30 overdraft fee now owned a penthouse. No one gave it to me. No one vouched for me. I earned it. Through years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and relentless discipline. That moment wasn't just financial, it was personal. I had crossed an invisible line. What made it sweeter was the location. That same building had smaller rental units on the lower floors, the kind some of my old neighbors had moved into. People who once laughed at me now shared elevators with me, not knowing I lived above them, literally and symbolically. I didn't smirk or gloat. I didn't need to. Life had already made the statement for me, and I had nothing to prove. The irony was poetic, but the peace was real. I had arrived without fanfare, and that made it even more powerful. On move-in day, I didn't hire a luxury service or throw a party. I packed what little I owned into the back of my Toyota and drove myself there. Security greeted me with confusion, probably wondering why someone with a car like that belonged in a place like this, but I didn't explain. I took the elevator up, unlocked the door, and stood in silence inside that sunlit penthouse. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just exhaled deeply. The kind of exhale you take when you've been holding your breath for years. I furnished the place slowly, intentionally. No rush, no debt. Each piece I brought in represented a step in my journey. A desk where I could write in peace. A couch where I could sit without hearing neighbors argue through the walls. A kitchen where I could finally cook without feeling cramped. This wasn't just a home, it was the physical embodiment of my transformation. Every corner reminded me of how far I had come and how far I was willing to go to protect it. Word spread eventually. A few old neighbors figured it out, piecing together stories, asking questions. One even had the nerve to ask how I got so lucky. I smiled and said, it wasn't luck. It was late nights, hard work, and sacrifice. They laughed nervously, maybe hoping I'd soften the truth. But I didn't, because I had spent too many years being underestimated. It wasn't my job to make anyone feel comfortable with my growth. I had earned every square foot of that space. That purchase wasn't about status or revenge. It was about ownership of my home, my story, my worth. I realized in that moment, they hadn't just laughed at my car. They had laughed at the version of me that was still struggling, still fighting. But they never saw the woman I was becoming. And now they didn't recognize the woman I had become. That was the part they couldn't understand. I didn't change overnight. I just never stopped moving. The invitation came as a surprise, a business event out of town, sponsored by my client. I wasn't used to such things. Back when I was driving that old Toyota, the idea of flying anywhere felt like a fantasy reserved for someone else's life. I showed up in my usual way, feeling out of place among sharply dressed guests and polished executives. But I reminded myself I belonged here. I had earned this seat, this chance. So I settled in, ready to learn and network. After the event, my client's team mentioned a helicopter ride back to the city. I almost declined. I thought about booking an Uber instead, something familiar, something simple. But then a quiet voice inside me said, "This is your moment. Take it." I nodded, agreeing to the ride. The helicopter was sleek and modern, a far cry from my cramped car. As we lifted off, the city spread beneath me like a living map, streets and buildings glowing in the dusk light. The pilot asked where I wanted to be dropped off. I paused, my mind racing. Should I ask to land at the nearest helipad downtown? No. I thought of the condo, the place where my journey began and transformed. I asked him to land on the rooftop helipad of my building, the same building where neighbors once mocked my old car. It was a small act of defiance, a statement I wasn't sure I was ready to make loud and clear, until now. As the helicopter descended, I could see the familiar rooftop garden, the pool glistening under the evening sky. I felt a strange mix of nerves and pride. A few curious neighbors looked up, probably wondering who was arriving like this. I imagined their faces, the whispers behind curtains. They had laughed when I drove in with dents and rust. Now I was landing above them. It was dramatic, yes, but poetic. A quiet victory. Stepping out onto the rooftop, the cool breeze hit my face. I took a moment to breathe it all in. The height, the silence, the city lights flickering like stars beneath me. The same city I had struggled in, fought for, and finally found my place within. I wasn't the woman they thought I was anymore. I was a new version of myself, one that owned her story, her failures, her wins. Walking down to my apartment after the helicopter landed, I kept my head low. I didn't want a spectacle. This was for me, for the years of silent work, tears, and perseverance. I unlocked the door and looked around at the life I had built, not flashy, but real and hard-earned. That night, as I lay in bed, I smiled quietly. No one else needed to know how far I'd come. I knew that was enough. I thought about the old car sitting in the parking lot below. It was still there, a reminder of the woman I had been. The woman who had refused to give up. I didn't feel embarrassed anymore. I felt powerful. The journey hadn't erased my past. It had added layers of strength I hadn't known I had. And tonight, as I drifted to sleep, I felt peace. Real peace. The helicopter ride wasn't just transportation. It was a symbol of change, of rising above, of quiet triumph. I didn't need anyone's approval or applause. I had taken a step that once seemed impossible. And with each step forward, I was rewriting my story. Not for the neighbors who laughed, but for the woman who refused to be defined by their judgment. I was free. That afternoon, I walked through the parking lot toward the elevator, passing my old Toyota sitting quietly in its usual spot. The dents, the faded paint, the stubborn little scratches, they all told stories no one cared to hear back then. That car was my companion through late nights, tears, and relentless determination. It had carried me when I had no other way to get around. Today, it felt like a monument to survival rather than shame. I paused, touched the roof lightly, and whispered a thank you. The neighbors I'd once heard whispering and laughing were there too. But this time, their voices were gone. Instead of smirks or sideways glances, there was silence. Some of them looked at me with wide eyes, uncertain how to react. The woman they thought they knew was gone. In her place stood someone quiet but uncheckable. Some shuffled their feet, trying to find words. A few approached, pretending they had always been in my corner, their smiles a little too bright to be genuine. I returned their greetings with a calm smile. I wasn't bitter. I didn't want to drag anyone down with my past pain. I was focused on what came next. The years of struggle had taught me to conserve energy for battles worth fighting, and this wasn't one of them. Those whispers were noise I had long since learned to tune out. Now I had something far more important to protect, my peace. One neighbor, the same woman who used to glare when I parked beside her shiny new SUV, came over and said, "I guess you showed us all." I nodded, but said nothing. I didn't need to explain myself. My success wasn't a competition or punchline. It was proof of resilience, of grit, of unwavering faith in myself. That was the story I wanted to tell, not through words, but through quiet strength. Some neighbors lingered longer, trying to make small talk about the neighborhood, the weather, the kids. I answered politely, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about how much had changed, not just my address or bank balance, but the woman I had become. The woman who no longer feared judgment, who no longer felt the need to explain her worth. I had rewritten my narrative in the silence that followed their laughter. Passing by the parking lot felt like a final chapter closing. I looked around at the familiar surroundings, the cracked pavement, the faded lines marking parking spots, the same tree that had bloomed every spring. Those details hadn't changed, but I had. I was no longer a woman hiding behind her car or her fears. I was someone who had faced the darkness and come out stronger. That quiet lot had witnessed it all. As I walked away, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. I wasn't defined by the whispers or the laughter anymore. I was defined by the work I'd done when no one was watching. The nights spent learning, the sacrifices made in silence, the tears shed alone. That old Toyota was a symbol, not of failure, but of tenacity. And now, that chapter was behind me. I stepped into the elevator, the doors closing softly behind me. My reflection in the glass was no longer the woman they thought they knew. It was someone whole, someone free. The silence in the parking lot wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of a journey I had survived and the promise of a future I was ready to build. And that was more than enough. I used to crave approval, to fit neatly into boxes others created for me. But now I walk through life without needing validation from anyone. I've learned that the loudest voices often don't know your story, and the smallest actions reveal your true strength. I no longer worry about how people categorize me, whether I'm successful enough, pretty enough, or strong enough. I am simply who I am, fully and unapologetically, and that's more powerful than any label. Mentoring other women has become one of my greatest joys. Not because I've made millions or built an empire, but because I remember the ache of invisibility, the feeling of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. I tell them what I wish someone had told me, that strength often looks quiet. Resilience isn't always loud, and progress isn't always visible. Sometimes it's just the courage to keep showing up day after day. When no one is watching, I see myself in them, the hesitant steps, the self-doubt, the fear of failure. But I also see what they don't yet see, the power inside waiting to be claimed. I share my story not to boast, but to remind them that survival is just the beginning. Growth happens in the cracks of broken dreams and in the silent work behind closed doors. I want them to know they are not alone and that they can become more than what others expect. The woman I was years ago needed someone to believe in her, not just in words, but in presence. Now, I try to be that presence for others. One, listen without judgment, encourage without pressure, and celebrate every small win like it's a revolution. Because for many of us it is. It's a rebellion against invisibility, a claim to space and dignity in a world that often tries to shrink us. I have learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers softly in the morning light when you choose to try again. Sometimes it's a quiet smile after a hard conversation. Sometimes it's the decision to keep going despite the exhaustion and doubt. I embody that quiet strength now, the kind that moves steadily, unshaken by noise or expectation. That strength has become my armor and my gift. People still try to put me in boxes. She's private, she's reserved, she's successful but strange. But I've stopped caring about fitting in. I've realized the most interesting people are the ones who don't fit any mold perfectly. I'm comfortable in my contradictions. I am soft and tough. I am vulnerable and resilient. I am a work in progress, and that's exactly how I want to be known. When I look in the mirror, I don't just see survival. I see transformation. I see a woman who refused to be defined by her past, who carved out a future with grit and grace. I see someone who's still learning, still growing, still becoming. And I smile because I finally feel at home in my own skin. I am no longer a stranger to myself. This is who I am, a woman they can't categorize. A woman who walks quietly through the world, carrying a story of struggle and triumph. I don't need to shout to be heard. I don't need to prove my worth. I just need to be, and that, more than anything, is my power. This journey wasn't about proving anyone wrong or showing off what I'd achieved. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my choices, my future. The helicopter ride, the penthouse, the bank statements, none of it meant anything without the deeper shift inside me. I never wanted revenge against those who laughed or judged. I just wanted freedom. Freedom to live on my own terms, free from the weight of other people's opinions and limitations. What truly changed me was the moment I decided to believe in myself when no one else did. When the whispers of doubt were loudest, I chose to keep going anyway. I chose to study late at night instead of giving in to exhaustion. I chose to keep applying, keep learning, keep trying, even when it felt hopeless. That choice, every day, every small decision, added up to a transformation that no money or status could buy. Looking back, I see now that the hardest battles were the ones I fought within. Fighting my own fears, my own insecurities, and the parts of me that wanted to give up. Those moments of doubt were real and raw, but they were also the doorway to strength. I had to stop listening to the world's definitions of success and start listening to my own. And that's where real freedom began, in the quiet courage to trust myself. If you're listening to this, maybe you felt invisible too. Maybe you've been laughed at, doubted, or dismissed. Maybe you're holding on to a dream that seems too far away, or a life that feels impossible. I want you to know this. You are not alone. The journey is hard, but it's worth it. The pain, the setbacks, the tears, they're all part of something bigger. And if you keep going, you can get there too. You don't need a perfect plan or a big break. You don't need permission from anyone. You only need to believe in yourself, in your worth, in the possibility of change. It's okay to start small, to fail, to stumble. What matters is that you keep showing up, keep fighting, keep believing that your story isn't finished yet, because it's not. It's just beginning. Freedom isn't about flashy cars or expensive condos. It's about waking up without dread, speaking your truth without fear, and making choices that nourish your soul. It's about feeling whole, no matter where you started. And it's about knowing that your value isn't tied to what others think, but to who you are, a resilient, brave, imperfect human being with a story worth telling. So if you're ready, start today. Choose freedom over fear. Choose belief over doubt. Choose to take one step, no matter how small, toward the life you deserve. It won't be easy, it won't be fast, but it will be real. And every step will build the quiet power inside you. The same power that carried me from a beat-up car to a life I never thought possible. I never wanted revenge. I only wanted freedom. And now, standing here, I can say with certainty, freedom is the greatest victory of all. And it's waiting for you too.